Hello and welcome to another edition of Voices of the West with Dusty Saddle. Today we have award-winning for almost everything you can ever possibly imagine this, Spur Finalist Award several times, and very influential writer for the Western genre. I'd like you to welcome Mills Jr.
Good morning. How are you today?
Oh, we're getting started going along here.
Good.
Phil, start off a little bit here. Tell us a little bit about how you would describe yourself.
I'll describe myself. Well, I grew up on a farm in Missouri and got exposed to Western writing through a couple of different ways. My dad was born in Montana, so we would go out there as a child and when I was a kid and see that country. And my grandfather cowboyed with a little bit with Charles Russell, the artist.
Oh my!
And so I had that in there. But then I think the thing that on a daily basis, my mother had all of Zane Grey's books. And she read them from cover to cover, and so there was there, and for me to look at and to see. Now, while some people look at Louis L'Amour and some of those, I had Zane Grey as the guy to more or less look at, and I decided I wanted to try write a book, and but I, like many writers today, you don't really get that opportunity because you have family and careers and other challenges in your life. So you really say, I'm going to do that someday. I'm going to do that someday. And then one day you realize, I'm running out of some days. I better get at it. And so it took me 7 years to write the first one, but I finally got it done.
How did you make yourself find the time to be able to write it?
It's interesting. I wrote a lot of it at night, late at night, 1, 2 in the morning, because I had a job during the day. And so you get home, you have dinner, and you're tired. And so you say, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to go write. And then eventually you go lay down and get in bed. And what you would find is the story now is starting to come to you. And you're going, gosh, I need to get up and get this down on paper because this is some good stuff. At least I thought it was good stuff. And so you'd look at the clock and you go, wait a minute, it's 11, 12 o'clock at night. And then you get started. And the thing is you're writing about some of this thing. You might be writing about a prairie fire or a stampede or something traditional Western. And you get so involved in it. Now you really can't sleep because you're so wound up. The adrenaline's going because in your mind, you were there and in part of it. So those were fun times.
Absolutely. On those great moments that wake you up in the middle of the night, what do you think makes a great Western story?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think a great Western story is like any story. It's well written. It has a good subject. It has good quality characters, both primary characters and secondary characters that you've developed very well. You have a great plot, and there's probably maybe a sense of mystery in there. And I realize some like to have a little romance in there as well. And whether it's you love your horse or you love the girl down the road, but one way or the other, you need to have all of those elements in it. But that's true of any story. And I think just because it's set in the West gives it a little different element that makes it, well, at least for me and people like me, a little more enjoyable to read.
Yeah, definitely. You've gotten the reputation for writing about the land and taking in the picturesque vastness of the West and being able to put it into words, and that you've number of commendations for that, for poetry, for just novel writing, for everything.
Thank you. Well, I was living in Georgia when I wrote the first book, and as you know, if you're a writer, you've got to be accurate in everything you're trying to say. If you're describing a different scene and you're writing about an area you don't actually live in, which I was trying to do, I was trying to write about the Chugwater, Wyoming area of southeast Wyoming. I'd been through there a few times, but I read it. So I went out there on several occasions just to get a feel of the land, to get a feel for what's there. And I did something that maybe is not really unique. I took a tape recorder with me, and I would go out as far away from cars and highways and traffic and everything as I could. And I'd just step outside the car and I'd just let it envelop me, if you will. And I would write what I was feeling in that. I would record what I was feeling in that tape recorder, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the birds, the grasses and the wind and things. Just let it overwhelm me. And then I brought that back with me to Georgia. And then I didn't even listen to it for 6 months or so. And then I would turn it on. It's, gosh, I was really into the move, really into the moment out there. And so then I thought, well, if it's affecting me that way, I want to put that type of thing in my stories as well. So the reader gets at least a part of what I was feeling in those moments. So,
yes. What do you think is the most underexposed and underdeveloped part of the Old West?
Oh, gosh. Underexposed and underdeveloped. Well, I think probably the some of the ethnic groups. I don't think there's been a lot written about the Chinese and their involvement in the West. I don't think that there's been enough credit given to the Black Americans, who, especially after the Civil War, 25% of all cowboys were Black, and not everybody really knows that. So I think that's been an underdeveloped thing. I think also undeveloped has been writing for juveniles. I think there's been a real lack of getting juveniles involved. And this is important in today's generation, especially, to get something for at their level and what they. So I grew up around Westerns all the time, television, movies, whatever, but the young people today have not been able to do that. So I think we need to do something to get more young people involved and get them more interested in some of the things. It may not be the things we saw, but something like that. So that's an underdeveloped area. And I'm sure there's other ethnic groups as well, women maybe, that aren't as well covered in the Westerns that have been written thus far. But so there's a lot of room for growth there, and there's a lot of room for future authors today to get involved and get into those areas, because that's a niche that hasn't really been addressed yet. So somebody jump in there, they could be real popular probably pretty quick.
Absolutely. You touched on this here real quick, but how do you feel that the Western market is changing?
Oh, gosh. Again, going back to the fact that people like myself grew up around it. And so we had especially even prior to my generation, they had a voracious appetite for reading about the West. I mean, whether you go clear back to the dime novels and the like, there was a real appetite for it. As we've grown older, the older generation, like myself, we still have some of that appetite, but there are a younger group that don't. So as a result, we don't have the interest in the Western as we grew up around it, the Zane Greys like I did. So I think what we've got to do as writers is we've got to address that. We've got to come into it from a different vantage point, because we're competing with games on our phones and things of that nature for our young people. So we've got to find a way to get the Western in there, and you do that with good writing, make it interesting, make it exciting, and I think we can do that. There's still hope out there, and I still believe strongly that there's a market for the Western. It's going to be different. It's going to be different because we may not be writing about Indian wars and things, but we can still set our stories in the West. There's Craig Johnson with his Longmire series, for example. That's a good example. That's West, and that's Westerns, but it's more of a modern contemporary Western. And I think we're going to have to look more at that type of writing, and maybe in the future.
Very good. Yes, definitely. Similar vein on this. How do you feel that Westerns are best promoted?
Oh, gosh. That's a good question, because in the old days, if you got published, and especially if you were published by a major publishing company, they helped you do a lot of the marketing. That's not true anymore. And so you're going to have to do a lot of it yourself. And so that means being creative and doing that. And if you can find a publisher or someone or a company that's willing to go out there and help you market those things, whether it's digitally or on social media or something like that, then we got to take advantage of it, because that's the way that's where they're going for their information now. People don't watch the news as much as they go on social media and decide, well, this is where all the good stuff is. So as writers, we need to get our stories and our books and our promotion of ourselves in those areas. Now, one of the problems is that a lot of us are writers, but we're not necessarily marketers. So we've got to either get some help, or we've got to do a better job of doing that type of marketing of our own work. So.
Absolutely. My wife is nodding over there. She does a lot of the social media for Dusty Saddle on things.
Right.
More social media things. Yes, definitely.
More social media. So get as many followers as you can, and Get your own site for you, and away from maybe your personal site, but an author site or something, so that you can get the followers and involved in that. Get involved in different groups, writing groups. Western Writers of America has a Facebook group. Get involved in that, and some of the others have as well. Women Writing the West, etc.
What do you think that readers are looking for nowadays?
Oh gosh, I think they're looking for the same thing they've always looked for: a good story, well written, that has what I want to say, that has a good something that can reach them emotionally. And I bothers me sometimes when I hear somebody, well, he or she sits down and reads a book in an evening. Well, if they can read it that fast, to me, they're not getting the essence of the story. They're reading it and they're getting through it. But I think I think as writers, we need to have something in our stories. They need to be well written, but something to grab the emotions of the reader. Something that says, gosh, I was so caught up in that, I couldn't lay it down, or I learned so much. I felt I was there. I cried when they cried. I laughed when they laughed. And if that's good writing, then I don't think, again, Westerns have a innate ability to bring those elements into their stories, but Western writers. But I think if we're going to do stay on this and in the future, we've got to get those elements in our stories. If we do that, again, it doesn't have to be a Western, but of course I'm prejudiced. I'm for Westerns. I think we're going to have a good readership and want people who want to read our work. But you've got to have the elements there. You can't just tell a story and like a children's book or something, and here it is, and we're done. No, you need to take the time to develop those characters so you know them, you feel them. I give a quick story here. After my first book, I was at work. I was still working, and I got an email one day, and the person said, I don't remember who it was, said, I need to know about Jake and Sarah. Did they get married? And whatever happened to Molly? And I'm sitting there at my desk, and I'm going, who are they talking about? I don't have a clue. I don't even know a Jake and Sarah. And I started to write back, and I think you sent this to the wrong. Wait a minute, they're talking about the characters in my book. but they had got so caught up in the story. Now they felt like they wanted to know, well, what's next? We know that you've introduced these characters, and you've done it, I guess, so well that we now feel like we know them, and we want to know what happens in their lives. What's going to happen next? And so I ended up writing a second book that kind of carries that story along. So yes, we need to write stories that have great characters, great secondary characters that our readers can get caught up in that character and that emotion.
Absolutely. And people are more, don't know if binge reading is the appropriate thing, but they like serial reading. They like, if they like somebody, they want to read a lot of them as they go through there, not just they get to one book, finish it, and just like, okay, what happens next? What do I do?
That's right. Well, look at all the series or on Netflix and whatever. We get caught up in these where there's Yellowstone or whatever. We want to know, well, I don't want to wait till next fall to find out what's going to happen. I need to know what's going on here next week. And so, yes, you're right. A series is important.
Walk me a little through your overall process, going from inspiration to a final published book here. What gets your interest to be able to start writing?
Oh, gosh. Well, I have so many ideas for stories that, it takes a while to figure out, all right, maybe I ought to go this route first. And in some cases, they start out as short stories. And then you think, well, then enough people read it and say, well, Phil, I want to know more about this. Why don't you expand this more into a book or something? And I've had that happen a few times. But generally, I'll come up with an idea, and then I start on it and try to get that lead going, getting that first chapter written. And then I kind of let the story tell itself. I know that may sound crazy. I may have a rough idea how I want it to end. But for the most part, I kind of let it weave and web and ebb and flow through its own dimensions there. And it's amazing how different things happen. You go, all right, I'm going to do this, but wait a minute. What if there was a prairie fire right here? Or what if some bad guys showed up at the same time? Or they cut the fences and let the cattle out and it looks like rustling, but whatever. So as you get into this, that's kind of the way I do the stories. I kind of let them write themselves. But because my background, I'm able to, as I'm reading it, I think it would be great if something happened here, and I need I need to fire this up a little bit because it's a little bland and whatever. So that's kind of the way I do it. Now I know some people they're able to type on a typewriter or a computer. A typewriter. I'm old enough to type. But I handwrite everything, and then as I'm typing it on my laptop or my computer, I start doing the serious editing at that point.
Very good. You said, do you work things primarily from a plot or from a character when you're getting started?
Generally a plot. And I say that, but there's been times where I've started with the characters and said, all right, now I like this character. What can I have him or her do to make it a story out of it? And there's been that usually ends up more of a short story, perhaps, because at least in the beginning, because I thought, all right, I like this character and I'm going to develop them this way or this way. And all right, now let me know more about their lives. And I say, let me know. I'm talking maybe in the third person here, but I want to know what makes them tick, what makes them interesting, what problems are they facing that I want to make sure that they get put out there. And from that standpoint, it becomes a character-driven story. But sometimes it's, well, I have this happening, and I wrote one where I wanted a guy to get involved in a gold mine situation, and he was killed, and somebody else inherited it, whatever. But so in that case, it was more of a plot-driven story. I had an issue here. All right, now who are the characters am I going to bring into it to make it happen and get it solved or resolved?
Have you ever had the voice of a character suddenly tell you, no, I wouldn't do that, go back and rewrite the story?
Just about. There are times you go, well, now, wait a minute, he or she's not going to do that. That doesn't make sense. And but yes, you get so caught up in the characters that you sometimes have them talking to you. Yes. Yeah, that happens.
What kind of Western have you long dreamed of writing but haven't gotten to yet?
Well, this may surprise you a little bit. I've actually written some children's books, and I believe, and I don't know where it's come from necessarily, because I don't have anybody in my family that I can point to. I think there is a need, and I've got my notes here. Well, I want to give you two examples, but one, I think there needs to be a juvenile story written on Alzheimer's. That may not be Western, although my plans are to make it set in the West. But I think you can find information where adults have all kinds of information because they maybe see it with family members, et cetera. And then you have young kids being told, well, this is what's happening to grandma or whatever, or grandpa. But I think there's a lack of information for juveniles that, let's give them credit for being smarter and older than we sometimes give them credit for being. And so let's don't talk down to them on that subject. So I don't know that I'm answering your question, but that's a story I really feel like that I need to write and want to write. And it's always in the back of my mind. I need to get started on it. And there's a second one. I grew up in Missouri, and I want to write a story about mules. Aspect about mules. I don't know. I've got this much information, and it's just sitting in my closet over here, and something's telling me, Phil, you better get that information out and write a story about mules.
Well, they got the big borax teams that come out of Death Valley. Those are certainly something to write about.
That's right. That's true. That's true. And I still watch that show on TV now and then when I like.
Very good. What are you currently working on?
Oh gosh. Well, three things. I've got my first book was Where a Good Wind Blows. That was followed up where the wildflowers dance. And then that was, I'm writing right now and working on it. I feel like it's written, it's got some editing, it needs to be done, is where cold the waters run. And it's continuation of the story of Jake and Sarah and Molly and those people's characters, but I'm taking it down the road a ways and involving their kids at this point. So I've jumped ahead about 15 years and got their young people involved. I'm excited about that book. I've got about 85,000 words on it. So technically it's a pretty good length right now, but it needs some editing. And one thing I've learned, even though I was a newspaper editor and a magazine editor in my past, I cannot edit my own work. I mean, you know it so well. I don't think anybody can. They're honest. You know it so well, you start just skipping over things because you're speed reading it, and you're not even reading the sentences because you know what they say. You wrote them. So I've got those. I've got that third in the trilogy pretty well written. It just needs the editing. And then I've got 2 children's books that I've written, 2 more that are being illustrated right now. I've got an illustrator that lives in Canada and another one that lives here locally. And I'm excited about those. Those are a couple of, and one of them in particular is really a good story. It's based on something I did in high school, and I've taken it down to about a 4th grade level. And this poor boy's done it. He did what I did, but he's going to get out of it a different way. So those are the 2 main things. And then for a long time, I used to, for people who know me, know that on Facebook, I used to post almost daily an inspirational piece. I take a photo that I had taken and put a poem with it, or put some sort of just short 150 word inspirational thing for that day. And so I have people for years who have said, Phil, when are you going to put all those in a book? And so I'm working on that. I'm actually getting down and putting it down and putting it together as an inspirational book. And the reason I do that is I've had a lot of people who will write me and say, Phil, I needed to hear that today. I've had people who have written me and said, Phil, I'm going through this or that, and your words you wrote today comforted me. Whatever. I'm not a preacher. Never been a pastor. I've never been in the pulpit, whatever. But there's just something that made me want to write some of those things. And apparently, if I could help one person, then I felt like I achieved something. And as a result, they're wanting them in some sort of inspirational book. So I'm working on that. So that's one of the things I'm doing. And there's all kinds of other projects. And I want a book of short stories. I want this, I want that, I wrote one I call the Laramie Letter. It's a book. I wrote it in Georgia, hand wrote it. I've never typed it. It's sitting right here in a file. So I better get to work on that so I can get it out there someday.
If it's done, yeah, definitely get it up there.
Yeah. There's no reason not to.
No, it's easy enough to get things published these days. Might as well get it out there so people can see it.
That's right. Otherwise, I'm going to pass away someday, and people are going to go into my files and say, "My gosh, he had all this work, but he never did publish it."
It's the great unpublished novel that, yes, will come up definitely.
Yeah, I'll win the Pulitzer Prize for something I didn't even know was good. So,
very good. Where can people find out more about your work?
I have a website. That's probably the easiest way to go. It's www.philmillsjr.com. And it's philmillsjr.com. So yeah, that's the best way to go. My stuff is on Amazon. I think I may have a couple things even on barnesandnoble.com, but all of it's in Amazon. So
very good. I'll finish things up here. What would be a parting word of advice, or what would be the best advice that was ever given to you about writing that would inspire other writers?
Read. And my feeling is, and that's what I was always told, do a lot of reading. Back even my journalism days, they would say, Phil, if you want to be a good writer, be a good reader. Just read, especially good works, read those things. But I've come since to learn that it's not always the good stuff that you learn from. Sometimes you read bad stuff and you learn from it just as much. Well, gosh, I hope I don't do that. And I hope I don't use run-on sentences or this word or that word, overdo it. Also, I guess advice is just read, and then write all the time. Don't stop. I'm not one of these to sit down and write every day, but a lot of people do, and they found that that's important. They get up at 8 o'clock, whatever, have a cup of coffee, and they go right immediately to writing. I'm not that strict. If I did, I'd probably be more prolific. But so read is my best advice, I think. And don't give up. If somebody turns you down, turn around and find somebody else to do it.
There are lots of people out there and lots of ways to get your stuff seen these days. So
that is true. That is true. So
don't get for it. Out there, write and make it happen. Yes.
That's right. Don't give up. If it's your passion, it's your dream, don't let it slide by. Go for it. So.
Well, Phil, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate the opportunity to interview you.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. I appreciate you giving me a call.
All right. Thank you.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.